1,000,000 to 1 odds have you witnessed? Was having a slingshot war with rocks in the woods, because that's what 13-year kids do. Steve and I see each other on parallel trails and we both let one fly. The rocks hit mid-air and ricocheted perfectly at 90-degree angles. Was at a company picnic when Ellie comes to say hi and we give a quick handshake, but we could tell something was weird. We released the handshake, a bee flew out. My dad accidentally popped the lens of his glasses out when we were riding up a chairlift on a massive mountain. The snow below was groomed so a lens would not have stuck out like it would have if it fell in fresh powder. Just as we stopped to listen to him complain again, the tip of my ski hit it. I had found the lens down the mountain, nowhere near the lift. To this day no one knows how it got so far from under the chairlift, but I was like finding a transparent needle in a haystack. I was born on June 3rd, as was my grandfather. And so was his father. My mother had a large section of her uterus removed after giving birth to my older sister, and her water broke 9 days before I was actually born. I was born with minimal complications and no birth defects. When she first told the doctor she was pregnant for the second time, apparently he just looked up at her and said, "No, you're not." Then after doing a pregnancy test, he told her, "Your husband is a hell of a shot." Apparently the pregnancy alone was 1,000,000 to 1. When her water broke, the nurses told her it hadn't, and that she must have just pissed herself, and sent her home. It wasn't until 9 days later, when the contractions ramped up, that they went back, and the doctor that prepped her was furious she was sent home in the first place. Apparently when I was born I looked like a shriveled up prune, but had no major medical complications. This always amazes a friend of mine, since her niece was born about a day after her mother's water broke under similar circumstances, and has required intense therapy since birth for cerebral palsy. I cracked an egg with a triple yolk in 2018. Apparently the odds are around 1 in 25 million. Was on a commercial flight that flew right past the space shuttle when it was taking off. Had a perfect view out the window. I saw a gargoyle fall from the perimeter of a lofty steeple. Instead of smashing on the sidewalk or hurting someone walking below, it miraculously landed in dense shrubbery in the churchyard, completely unscathed. I went to South Africa in 1988 with my father, who was a research cardiologist at the time. The trip was for a symposium on the side effects of a blood-thinning drug on which he had just completed a large study. During one of the breaks, we drove about 2 to 3 hours out of Johannesburg to a wine region to tour a winery. Joining our party were the 2 other cardiologists currently conducting research on the drug. One of the doctors was from Italy, and one was from Venezuela. At lunch, an older woman at the table next to ours passed out and fell on the floor, hitting her head fairly soundly. It was lucky that she happened to be sitting next to 3 doctors who could attend her while we waited for the ambulance. What was crazy was that when they were talking to her about her medical history, she was taking the medicine they were studying. It turns out the dosage she had been prescribed was dangerously high, which could cause blackouts and unconsciousness. I'm not sure what the odds are of passing out in rural Africa while sitting next to the 3 foremost medical experts in the world, and those experts having come from 3 other continents, on your blood thinners side effects, but I'd imagine the odds are pretty low. Not 1,000,000 to 1. But working for a casino I did spin the 1 to 50 top prize, big wheel, 3 times in a row. Years ago, long before GPS was available to the general public, I was traveling for work. I was 4 states away from home in a city I had never been to before. I had to be at a location my company was in the process of building. I needed to hit an ATM, so I'd have some cash in my pocket, and found a bank in the parking lot of a small mall. While standing online at the ATM, I turned around and asked the guy behind me if he knew how to get to it. He looked at me and yelled. It was someone I had worked with for a few years at a previous job, about 5 years earlier, and 1,000 miles away. We went to lunch, agreed to keep in touch, then never did. Edit. Thank you for silver, kind stranger. This happened last night at a dive bar in Brooklyn. The bartender and I were bored, so we invented a game that involved throwing a Nerf football from one end of the bar in attempt to hit the back wall. It was dead, so nobody was in harm's way. After an awful throw, The bartender runs to retrieve the football and out of the blue yells "Go deep," then proceeds to fire a 100 miles per hour spiral directly at me. I dodge out of pure fear and the football crashes into my pint of beer and shot glass. Both items go flying at full speed off the bar into the ground, making a very loud shattering sound. We both go OMG, and he walks up to clean the mess when he holds his hands over his mouth in pure terror, looks me in the eyes, and says, "I killed a mouse." Sure as shit, under the broken pint glass, dead middle of the floor, laid the fresh corpse of a mouse who just so happened to be running from one side of the bar to another, and the pint glass landed exactly, directly on him when it flew off the bar. We are convinced this was a mouse Final Destination moment. We are still in disbelief. In 2006, when I was 19, I lived in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I went to Connecticut with a buddy to meet a girl he had been dating online. I stopped in a GameStop for a game to play on the drive back and had just gotten a job at one back home a few months prior and was really into helping people find new games to play. I saw this cute little old lady browsing games and I randomly asked her if she needed help, thinking it was for a relative, and she divulged to me how she loved turn-based RPGs, which I also loved, and I recommended Disgaea to her for the PS2. We left and life went on. A couple years later, I was still working at GameStop in Virginia and a little old lady came in and was expressing her excitement for Disgaea 3 for the PS3, and I mentioned that I had met a lady just like her in Connecticut a few years prior. What are the odds? She says that she used to live in Connecticut and that a young man in a game store turned her on to the Disgaea series a few years prior. She moved to Virginia to be closer to her daughter who lived in my hometown. I suppose I can't say 100% that this is the woman I met previously, but I'll be damned if it didn't seem like it. Edit, because someone took issue with me recommending Disgaea, a turn-based strategy RPG, because she liked traditional turn-based RPGs. This lady knew her sheet. She had played almost everything I could name and competently discussed them with me. She didn't say she liked apples and I handed her a tomato because she liked red round things. She made an informed decision and loved the game. Me, falling nearly 70 feet out of a tree to land at the feet of a retired cardiologist that was out for a jog. He was doing CPR within seconds of me hitting the ground. Of all the doctors in the world that could have been out for a jog, I fell in front of the one that worked on hearts and retired just a few short weeks prior to my wreck. Tree fell on my car while I was driving. No warning. Healthy tree, sunny day, just a tree that gave up on life and I just happened to get in the way. Edit for those curious. http imga comsp wk2zv. I have dwarfism and a third nipple. I like to think I'm the only 3-nippled dwarf in the world. Edit. Sorry, I have been informed that the correct terminology is a triple-nippled little person, or a trip-nip pipsqueak, or an itty-bitty triple titty. My dad took me to a baseball game when I was about 13. Several seats down was a guy who had just bought a hot dog. Right as he was getting ready to take a bite, a bird pooped on it. He didn't take a bite of the hot dog, but his mouth had been open, and, judging by his yelling, spitting, and cursing shortly after, he must have gotten some splashed contact in his mouth from the impact of the poop hitting the hot dog and some bouncing off. I was in downtown San Francisco once when I saw a guy across the street that looked very much like a guy named Bennett that lived in my dorm, Yosemite Hall, back in college, 10 years before, and 100s of miles away, but I couldn't quite be sure if it was him. Then, out of nowhere, a girl came running across the street and straight up to the guy and said, "Hey Bennett, remember me? I used to live upstairs from you in Yosemite Hall." I once texted my workout buddy shoulders today. And right when I sent it, my phone spontaneously spat out the text right back to me, as if he had sent it. Thought that was weird, but then my buddy told me it was him. Like we legit texted the same exact text to each other letter for letter at the exact same time. And yes, we did do shoulders that day. Went to a humongous metal festival this summer in Sacramento. Something like 60k people. They were raffling off a guitar that all of the bands there had signed. Dozens of big acts, Sode, Gua, Alice in Chains to name a few. At the end of the last day as we were leaving, a guy from our group said he wanted to buy a last minute ticket before they did the drawing, and that he'd meet us back at the cars. About 45 minutes later he calls us and says to come back. He needs an escort. Walk up and this motherfucker is holding the damn guitar. Not exactly one in a million, but it sure felt like watching somebody hit the jackpot on a lottery ticket. Went to meet my brother and his wife at a casino. As soon as I got there I called my brother to let him know I had arrived. He doesn't answer, but calls me back in less than a minuet 60 seconds. He tells me he has just hit a royal flush in video poker. It wasn't a huge jackpot, but he won something like $2,000. For winnings over $1,000 they make you sign some tax forms. So while the pit boss is going over the paperwork with my brother, Mysil, who is sitting at the video poker machine directly next to him, hits another royal flush jackpot. Another $2,000 before he even finished the tax form to claim the first jackpot. Don't know if it is one in a million, but when I was 18 myself and a buddy were walking down the street when an accident occurred down the block from where we were. We were walking with our backs to the location of the accident. Suddenly the one tire from one of the vehicles nailed my buddy in the back and sent him flying. He ended up knocked out from cracking his head on the pavement. He woke up in the hospital hours later with a fractured cheekbone and all sorts of bruising and abrasions. I bought a tire that had a cat and a space helmet on it. When I got back into town I was sitting at the bar telling my friend about it. The girl beside me, absolutely stunningly gorgeous, turns to me and pulls up her sleeve. With a tattoo of a cat and a space helmet that looked identical to my tie. I didn't even have the tie on, just happened to be telling my friend about it, and she happened to be right there. Work at the local central office for the fire department. One night my co-worker get a call about an apartment that is burning. It was his apartment. I went to a wedding in Greece once. She was American, and he was part Greek, and so they decided to hold the wedding near his family on the island of Icaria. I arrived by ferry with a friend late at night. We were met at the port by some friends who picked us up and drove us immediately to a club perched on a cliff overlooking the Aegean. We drank and danced for hours, and at a certain point I noticed the bride and groom having an argument. I didn't pay much attention, but an hour passed, and there was still discord among the wedding party. I asked what was wrong, and one of them told me that the bride was pissed because the groom lost the car keys, and we had no way back to the other side of the island where we were staying. I didn't really care. They would show up. But more hours passed, and still no keys. I went to the bride and said, "Don't worry, I'm good at finding things. I'll find the keys." I went back into the club and scoured the place but still, no keys. Then I lost interest. What did I care? I was partying on a Greek island with nowhere else to be. Time of my life. After a while, I saw that the sun was starting to come up. Nothing more amazing than sunrise on a Greek island. I walked some stairs down to the beach to watch the sun come up with a group from the party, drunk, euphoric, and totally at ease. As I stood on the beach, I looked down as a small wave came lapping up against my feet, and with the wave, came rippling up a set of keys. Yep. I was forced off the highway at 70 miles per hour when someone merged into my lane. My car did to complete 360s. I rolled backwards into a ditch, and I was fine. My car was fine too, just had to re-inflate my tires. I won $30K on a scratch ticket a year after that. 6 years after that, I won on Jeopardy! 5 years after that, I posted a story on Reddit that went viral, and I sold it to Warner Brothers. Edit, for those asking, see Ramesh Witrom. It's been 7 years since that, so some insane shit is going down this year. At Dave & Buster's, there's a ball drop game. There's a ball sitting really high up with a tube going straight down to a spinning wheel of ticket values. You hit a red button and that cues the ball to drop. I hit jackpot 4 times back to back, cleaned out the machine of tickets, got the guy to restock tickets, hit jackpot the next 2 times, won $1. I was quite happy. I literally just made this account to tell you guys a story I can't resist. A year ago, when my fiance was getting ready to propose, he took the ring out of the box and put it into his pocket. Because is that a box in your pocket? Or are you just happy to see me, right? Dinner didn't go as planned that night and he decided to wait. He puts the same pair of pants on the next day, well aware the ring was still there, up until later that evening, when he checks his pocket and the little thing was gone with only a small idea of where it could have fallen out at. Except any of those possibilities weren't exactly small. Fast forward a few days of him finally telling me about it, tearing the house apart to look, and narrowing it down to one place it could possibly be. The Costco parking lot. A white gold ring, in the middle of winter, between snowstorms, close every couple of hours, snow piles the size of a house. In a Costco-sized parking lot. It took 1 week to the date of searching, retracing steps, climbing snow piles with metal detectors and flashlights. But that morning we had 50-degree weather in January, and all of the snow piles had started to melt. A perfectly timed search that day, with a perfectly timed melt that melted the right pile just enough to expose the profile of Myring, and there it was. It got pushed 300 feet in front of a plow, covered in feet of snow, and plucked back out at the perfect time. All it had was a few scratches. We get married in April. I live in rural Wisconsin, so seeing a black bear is about a once every 2 year or so occurrence unless you actively seek them out. Me and a buddy were driving through a small town by some houses and said, "Look, a bear." I turned and looked, and it was a huge black dog fenced in someone's yard. I laughed. Okay, whatever. 10 minutes later, we drive back past the house. My buddy yells, "Look, a bear." I look at the house. The dog is now standing at the fence on its hind legs, sniffing at a small black bear on the other side of the fence, in the same exact spot he jokingly said to look 10 minutes earlier. Just an insane coincidence.